Good evening. Here's a question for you. Can a guilty verdict truly stand if the very evidence presented in court, well, if its history is questionable? What happens when the crucial steps, the rules for handling seized drugs, simply aren't followed?
It's a critical issue.
Today, we're diving into a Supreme Court case that really sparked debate on exactly these points, raising big questions about due process and, the war on drugs here.
We're looking closely at People of the Philippines versus Donna de Vera and Abigail Valiente. That's GR number 229364, decided October 16th, 2019.
And our mission for this deep dive: to unpack the facts, trace his path through the courts, and really understand the Supreme Court's final decision and what it actually means.
Exactly.
So let's get into the specifics. The accused are Donna de Vera and Abigail Cacal Valiente.
Right.
And the charge was violating Section 5, Article 2 of RA 9165. That's the illegal sale of dangerous drugs.
Correct. The incident allegedly happened back on October 9, 2011 in Laoag City.
Okay, so what did the prosecution say happened? How did this alleged sale go down?
Well, according to the prosecution, it started with an informant's tip about Cacal supposedly selling shabu. So the police set up a buy-bust operation. PO1 Shugayan was the poser buyer, with others as backup.
Standard procedure so far.
Right. The story goes that an informant introduced Shugayan to Cacal. Cacal then apparently contacted de Vera. She arrived and allegedly handed over one small plastic sachet.
The shabu.
Yes, containing methamphetamine hydrochloride. The weight was tiny, 0.0415 gram. Shugayan supposedly paid with marked money. The signal was given, and then both Cacal and de Vera were arrested.
Okay, and after the arrest, what did the prosecution claim happened next?
So they were taken to the police station. There, the prosecution said PO1 Shugayan marked the seized sachet with his initials JBS.
At the station, not at the scene.
That's what they claimed, at the station. They also said an inventory was done by SPO4 Ancheta, photos were taken, and a request was sent for a lab exam.
And the lab exam?
It came back positive for methamphetamine hydrochloride. That chemistry report became, a key piece of the prosecution's evidence in court.
But naturally, the defense had a totally different version of events.
Absolutely. Cacal's story was that he was actually in Laoag City looking for a job, waiting for someone about potential work, and he claimed he was framed.
And de Vera?
De Vera said she was just in the area to collect some money that someone owed her aunt. Nothing to do with drugs.
Did they have backup for these stories?
They did. Both presented witnesses who supported their alibis, essentially trying to prove they were somewhere else or doing something else entirely, not involved in any drug deal.
So we have two conflicting stories. The regional trial court, the RTC, heard all this. What did they decide?
The RTC sided with the prosecution. They found both de Vera and Cacal guilty, saying they acted in conspiracy for the illegal sale.
And the sentence?
Life imprisonment, plus a hefty fine of 500,000 pesos each.
Wow, life imprisonment. That's serious. Did the Court of Appeals see it any differently when it was appealed?
No, they didn't. The CA affirmed the RTC's decision completely.
On what grounds?
They basically said the prosecution had proven all the necessary elements for the crime of illegal sale. And importantly, they felt that the chain of custody for the drug was substantially complied with.
Substantially complied with. That sounds like a key phrase here, because that's where the Supreme Court came in, right?
Exactly. The big question for the Supreme Court was, did the Court of Appeals get it wrong? Was it an error to uphold the conviction despite these alleged problems, these procedural issues with the chain of custody?
The defense was essentially saying, hey, you can't be sure that the drug presented in court is the same one seized because the handling was flawed.
Precisely. They argued those flaws created reasonable doubt.
And the Supreme Court agreed with the defense. They overturned the conviction.
They did. They acquitted both de Vera and Cacal.
What was the core reason? It all came back to that chain of custody.
Yes. The Supreme Court concluded that the prosecution just hadn't established an unbroken, reliable chain of custody for the seized drug.
Unbroken and reliable.
Right. And because of those breaks, those lapses, the court felt there was serious doubt about the integrity and the very identity of the corpus delicti, the drug itself. The actual substance that forms the basis of the crime.
And they pointed out specific failures, didn't they? It wasn't just a general feeling.
Oh, absolutely. They listed several specific breaches. First, the marking. It wasn't done immediately at the place of arrest like it's supposed to be.
Which is crucial for preventing any switching or tampering right from the start.
Exactly. Second, the inventory and the photos. They weren't done at the arrest site either. And a big one, They weren't done in the presence of the accused, Vera and Cacal.
And weren't there rules about who else needed to be there for the inventory and photos?
Yes, very important. Section 21 of RA 9165 requires specific witnesses, a representative from the media, another from the Department of Justice, and an elected public official.
Were they present?
According to the Supreme Court's findings, no. Those required witnesses weren't there during the inventory and photography at the police station. That was a major red flag for the court.
So issues with marking, inventory, photos, witnesses, anything else?
Yes, more. The court found the accounts of how the drug was handled, from the moment it was seized until it showed up in court, were unclear and inconsistent.
Inconsistent how?
Well, there were discrepancies in the recorded weight of the drug at different points. The markings on the sachet itself seemed to vary in descriptions, and there were even conflicting details about the time the drug was handed over to the forensic chemist.
So the timeline was fuzzy too.
Right. And then there was the issue of who actually brought the evidence to the court.
Ah, yes, you mentioned that. It wasn't the person initially stated?
Correct. The initial documents suggested Police Senior Inspector Abigail delivered it, but testimony later revealed it was actually SBO2 Flojo.
That seems like a significant detail to get wrong in the chain of custody.
It definitely weakened the prosecution's claim of an unbroken chain. The Supreme Court really hammered the point that Section 21 isn't just a guideline.
It's substantive law.
Yes, it's substantive law, and strict compliance is required. It's not just a procedural technicality.
Now, there's usually a sort of saving clause in these rules, isn't there, for situations where perfect compliance isn't possible.
There is in the implementing rules and regulations. It allows for some deviation if there are justifiable grounds for not following the procedure strictly, and if the integrity and evidentiary value of the seized items are still properly preserved.
So did the prosecution provide justifiable grounds here?
The Supreme Court said no. They found the prosecution didn't offer any valid justification for why they didn't follow the mandatory steps. And crucially, they also failed to prove that the drug's integrity was maintained despite all these procedural shortcuts and inconsistencies.
So the saving clause couldn't save him, basically.
Essentially, yes.
What about the idea that we should generally presume police officers perform their duties correctly? The presumption of regularity.
The court addressed that directly. They stated that, yes, there's a presumption of regularity, but it's disputable. It's not absolute.
Meaning?
Meaning it cannot override clear, concrete evidence that procedures were not followed, especially when those failures cast doubt on the very evidence the case relies on. You can't just presume regularity when the facts show irregularity.
Right. It sounds like this case really reinforces some fundamental legal principles.
It absolutely does. It highlights several key doctrines. First, obviously, the chain of custody.
Which is that documented trail ensuring the evidence wasn't tampered with.
Exactly. From seizure to court presentation. Second, the corpus delicti.
The body of the crime in this case, the actual drug itself, you have to prove that specific drug was illegally sold.
Precisely. With moral certainty. Then there's Section 21 of RA 9165, the law itself laying out the mandatory steps.
The one they found wasn't strictly followed.
Correct. And finally, the presumption of regularity. This case is a clear example that this presumption has limits and can be overturned by evidence of procedural breaches.
It's a fascinating case with significant implications. It really makes you think, what does this decision tell us about how vital it is for law enforcement to follow procedures to the letter, especially when someone's liberty is at stake, potentially for life?
A very important point.
And, how does a ruling like this affect public trust in the justice system? And what about the ongoing efforts against illegal drugs? Does it complicate things, or does it ensure fairness?
These are really the big questions arising from this decision.
We'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think? Share your comments below. And if you found this deep dive insightful, please do mark it as a favorite.
Your engagement really helps.
And if you want to stay informed, if you want to get into the details of significant legal cases and understand their impact on society here in the Philippines, make sure you subscribe to The Deep Dive.
We try to bring you the crucial details and help make sense of what truly matters.
Thanks for joining us.